What is the reaction of your government to the news yesterday that these arms were sent to Iran via Israel, that they were the liaison, if you will, to distribute these arms to Iran? Any surprise in that, or is it something you've known for a long time?
No, I think it's not new. I mean, we have seen reports, even seen Israeli admission in the first 2 years of the war that they have supported Iran with equipments and spare parts for airplanes and some other items. So it's not new, firstly. And secondly, I believe that the Israeli government is still working out of this doctrine of Ben Gurion back in the 50s, that their natural allies in the area are the minorities in the Arab countries and the non-Arab countries in the region, and namely in this case Iran. Well, things have changed, the circumstances, the time have changed, but it seems to me that the Israeli government is still sticking to the same old concept.
Good evening and welcome to our program. This evening we're going to be discussing the news coming out of the White House yesterday. U.S. arms going to Iran via Israel, the money from that ending up in a Swiss bank account, and ultimately some of that money, at least $10 to $30 million of it, ending up in the hands of the Contras in Nicaragua. The part of this whole story that we're going to be discussing specifically this evening is the sale of U.S. arms to Iran and the impact of those arms sales on the war currently going on between Iran and Iraq. Nizar Hamdoon, Iraqi ambassador to the United States, what impact has the sale of U.S. arms to Iran had on the war between your country and Iran?
Carl, I think one really should be cautious at this moment to talk about any final impact, because nobody knows, exactly what being shipped to the Iranians, whether from the United States directly or from some third parties. So I don't think that at this moment one should really give any final judgment. But I would say here that war is a combination of factors that will could accurately reflect the kind of edge any party has on that war. It's not just the weapons. There is the morale factor, there is the economic factor, there is the social factor. In our case, I think Iran is running severe problems. The internal economical and social problems after 7 years of complete failure of the regime there to satisfy the people and to provide them with a better life, and continuous failure in the front not to achieve that divine duty, so to speak, of Mr. Khomeini and his government, and the conflict between the regular army, which is under disintegration, and the Revolutionary Guard of Iran, the role of the mullahs versus the role of the professionals, whether on the front or in the government at large. There are a whole set of elements that could really affect the overall view on the war. So shipments themselves are not going to affect, in my view, but let's not forget that this has provided the Iranian government with a new psychology, with a new feeling that they were able to overcome the biggest power in the world, and that they are able, through this policy of blackmailing governments, of taking hostages and try to work out a deal with some governments in the world. That have done that with several governments recently, that by gaining through this process, they start to believe that their procedures and their techniques, their divine techniques, so to speak, according to their standards, is working. So they'll stick more to it. This could have some kind of impact on the lifespan of the war, and therefore to prolong it and to bring about more casualties from Iranian people and from Iraqi people.
What is the reaction of your government to the news yesterday that these arms were sent to Iran via Israel, that they were the liaison, if you will, to distribute these arms to Iran? Any surprise in that, or is it something you've known for a long time?
No, I think it's not new. We have seen reports, even seen Israeli admission in the first 2 years of the war that they have supported Iran with equipments and spare parts for airplanes and some other items. So it's not new, firstly. And secondly, I believe that the Israeli government is still working out of this doctrine of Ben Gurion back in the 50s, that their natural allies in the area are the minorities in the Arab countries and the non-Arab countries in the region, and namely in this case Iran. Well, things have changed, the circumstances, the time have changed, but it seems to me that the Israeli government is still sticking to the same old concept.
Good evening and welcome to our program. This evening we're going to be discussing the news coming out of the White House yesterday. U.S. arms going to Iran via Israel, the money from that ending up in a Swiss bank account, and ultimately some of that money, at least $10 to $30 million of it, ending up in the hands of the Contras in Nicaragua. The part of this whole story that we're going to be discussing specifically this evening is the sale of U.S. arms to Iran and the impact of those arms sales on the war currently going on between Iran and Iraq. Joining us in our studios in Washington this evening is Mr. Nizar Hamdoon. He is the Iraqi ambassador to the United States. He has been in the United States for some 3 years. He's a career diplomat. He has been the Iraqi ambassador to the United States for the last 2 years and has been on C-SPAN's call-in program before. If you're a regular C-SPAN viewer, you know the rules. Phone lines are open for viewers in all areas of the country. We would invite you, if you've thought about some of the issues before us as far as this is concerned, we'd like to hear from you. If you live in the Eastern and Central time zones, it's 202-628-2525. Those of you living in Pacific and Mountain time zones, it's 202-783-2727. What is it that the Iraqi government at this point is saying to the U.S. in response to the news that basically the U.S. has been siding with Iran, I guess, for some time, at least for 2 years?
Well, first, Carl, I don't think that the United States have sided with us. We believed in the past, until this thing was revealed, that the United States was siding with its interest, its declared interest, in stabilizing the area and maintaining the political systems, who most of them are friendly to the United States, and Iraq being a stabilizing factor in stopping Khomeiniism as a phenomenon by stopping the Iranian troops right on the border and therefore defending countries in the Gulf like Kuwait and others from being threatened directly by Iran and by the Iranian doctrine of Khomeini. So we knew, I mean, we were told very clearly, openly, and this was the declared policy of the United States, also stated by the Secretary and by the rest of the officials here, that the United States maintains its neutral position on the war. It does not provide any party to that conflict with arms and spare parts and anything that could be helpful in its military effort. At the same time, they were saying publicly that they applaud Iraq's peaceful attitude and its readiness to settle the conflict peacefully whenever the other party is ready to do so, and condemning the Iranian insistence on its continuation. And all of a sudden, we have seen a different thing in the last couple of weeks, that there was provision of arms, there was something that was essential to the military effort of Iran in this war, and when Iran is on the offensive. So we are surprised, we were stunned. Until this moment, we are not in any initiative in that regard. We are trying to know more about that. We are trying to get a full explanation from the government of the United States in order to set our policy in that regard. We don't like to rush and to hurry into some judgments, because we believe that we should know more about the stories. We have our suspicions, because we don't think that any provision of arms under any pretext will be acceptable in this case. But still, one needs to know more about the incentives, about why, I mean, this thing really happened, and to what extent the United States is going to stick to this policy or go back to its old, known, stated policy of neutrality, which I believe is supported by the public opinion and by the Congress opinion in the United States.
Phone lines are open for viewers in all areas of the country discussing the sale of U.S. arms to Iran and its impact on the Iran-Iraq war. If you have a question or comment, you can use those numbers, which will appear periodically at the bottom of your screen. Virginia Beach, Virginia, you're our first caller for this hour. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'd like to discuss the role of, in brief, of Israel in all this ordeal. how certain things have gone by unnoticed in this country. One is the destruction of the nuclear reactor in Iraq prior to the war starting. And I'm wondering if Israel had some insight of whether the war was going to start sometime. And so this will have implication now. I'm wondering if that nuclear reactor was not destroyed, if the shift of power would have been different. Two, the espionage operation of Israel in the United States has been minimally covered and almost really covered up. Three, the role of Israel seems to be grandiose, and yet we always seem to cover it up and not really discuss it fully and not attribute any blame to the Israelis, almost to the point where we're accusing the presidents of all kinds of things, but we always seem to let Israel off the hook. I wonder what the comments of the ambassador would be.
Well, sir, on the reactor, obviously the Israelis at that time, 1981, I believe, in the summer, they got the benefit of this war situation, and their planes were able to, reach out to Baghdad and destroy that reactor, which was covered by the inspection of the international agency, and which was set for peaceful purposes, to develop a better technology, to provide better energy for the Iraqi people. And I think the United States position at that time was very clearly with Iraq against that act of Israel, which was condemned by most of the countries in the world and by the United States government. But again, I mean, what it triggers in mind that the Israelis were benefiting from the Iranian assistance on the continuation of the war, and originally from the war that Khomeini himself have started with Iraq by antagonizing, provoking, and by trying to destabilize Iraq and by exporting chaos to it. On the espionage things, that the stories we have read here about the Israeli interference and the rest of the matters, I prefer to leave that to the best judgment of the American people. I don't like really to indulge myself in any internal matter or to factors that have nothing to do directly with our affairs in Iraq now. For us in Iraq, our priority is that war, because it has taken its toll and it's killing thousands of our people on daily or on weekly or monthly basis. Not just from us, but even from Iran. I mean, and we care for ourselves, for our people, as well as for the Iranian people. All those people are being killed in this war. There are hundreds of thousands. The overall figure is well above 1 million individuals that have been killed, let alone the casualties, the prisoners of war. So this is the number one issue for me. On why or how Israel was engaged in this latest affairs, and whether it started the affair or somebody in the administration here, I don't think it's my business at this moment without also having enough information. And I think that we should wait more to see more information about this latest affair.
San Diego, California, you're next. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I have a question for Mr. Hamdoon concerning the Iraq-Iran war. I'm a Kurdish refugee that I've been a victim of that regime, Iraqi regime. I read in International Amnesty that the Iraqi government has put 800 children, Kurdish children, under arrest and has killed 3 little kids, about 4 years old. I was wondering if it's the war between Iran and Iraq they're doing that, or they're just killing the Kurdish of Iraq for other reasons.
Well, Iraq is the only country in the area where Kurdish population exists that has provided autonomy for them, provided them with the right of studying in their language, speaking their language, having their legislative body, and the rest of the rights that were provided since the 70s. I deny categorically this news or stories about Iraq detaining children. This is not our behavior. We have not done this, and it's not our attitude. This was merely an Iranian propaganda that came from Damascus. Again, it's also a Syrian propaganda. And I believe that the Iranian government tried to provide such stories to the media in order to cover the kind of crimes that the government in Iran is committing inside Iran against the people of Iran. So I deny that, and it's not true, and Iraq is very much interested in getting the Kurdish population playing its major role, and at least in this conflict now. And we are seeing that the Kurds are participating in all the fighting, especially those fighting that took place in the north. They were the people that were able to block the possibilities of an Iranian breakthrough in the north. The Iranians tried very hard in the last year or so to penetrate somewhere in the north. And the Kurdish troops there are part of our army, but usually serve their duty in the north, were able to wipe them out. So we cherish the Kurdish feeling in Iraq about the unity of the country and about the right of Iraq to defend itself, and therefore those stories are completely out of Iranian propaganda.
Washington, D.C., you're our next caller. Go ahead, please.
Excuse me, I'd like to ask the ambassador a question. How come when the ambassador said he's asking for the peace between Iran and Iraq, how come they let 50 or 60,000 mujahideen get the training in the Iraq field and go inside the Iran war the government? If they want a peace, they shouldn't train the Iranian that against the government to go inside the Iran and fight with them. If you want a peace with the government, you have to stop this thing to do.
What do you mean by mujahideen? You mean the Rajavi people?
Yes.
Well, Rajavi people have just been expelled from France in the last 5 months, I believe. And the war now in its 7th year. So this is not an element that has anything to do with the continuation of the war. And obviously, the Mujahideen were expelled from France for reasons that the Iranian government has preconditioned on the French in order to get back, in order to release some of the hostages in Beirut, to release back $1 billion and to expel Rajavi. And the French government decided to expel him. And the only place that he can really get a refuge was in Iraq. So this has nothing to do with the war. I mean, Iraq has expressed its readiness to go for peace. It has accepted 5 or 6 Security Council resolutions from the first week of this war back in 1980. And until now, we are ready to accept, have accepted all mediation efforts by United Nations, by the Islamic Conference Organization, and by the non-aligned movement, while Iran rejected them all. So I don't see how this thing really is related to the peaceful attitude of the Iraqi government.
What are the other major nations in the world selling arms to Iran?
Well, as an ambassador, Carl, I cannot really name other states, but obviously there are lots of Western European countries, Eastern European countries. I can't name here because it's very clear. Countries like Syria, Libya, North Korea, Israel, those countries provide Iran with arms and in some cases political support. And this is really an irony to see, Carl, that at the same time or in different times but in the same span of this war, you see countries like Syria, Libya, Israel, the United States, North Korea, and others support Iran at the same time with weapons, whatever the amount of weapons. Well, it's an irony, I mean, to see that radicals or moderates, whatever the kind of definition is, support the Iranian government with arms. This proves for me that the policy of blackmail of Iran was able to get, to catch really some of the governments to be under that blackmail and therefore to provide and to appease the Iranian government. And this is bad because this will trigger, in my personal view, more terrorism in the area. It will let more governments feel that, well, terrorism pays off. Iran has established this Islamic Jihad group in Lebanon back in 1982, and there is no doubt about it. Established Hezbollah and the rest of the establishments there, and started kidnapping people and taking hostages. The Iranian government started to work out some kind of things. They released the TWI hostages for a very simple reason, because they wanted to appear as they can influence events. So they work on terrorism, which could really lead lots of countries and governments and groups to feel that they may do the same and they can benefit. They get not only weapons, but even political support at certain points, as long as there are governments and policies that are ready to capitulate to this kind of policy.
Back to the phones. Agura, California. Good evening. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, good evening. Mr. Ambassador, I hear on Ted Kabul show there is, they said it was with the ambassador, there is a businessman, Arabian businessman with Mr. McFarlane. And now we hear there is the Saudi pay for the weapon for Iran. How much you know about that?
I have no information other than what the media here has reported. I personally don't feel that Saudi Arabia could be engaged in such affairs, because they have expressed from the beginning of this conflict and until now their support for Iraq, and they feel that Iraq is not just defending itself, but it's defending the rest of the countries in the area. That stability in the area has been maintained because of the Iraqi steadfastness for 7 years of vicious war. And Iraq was the only country that was ready to pay from the blood of its people to defend that stability. And if Iran could have any breakthrough in this war, this will lead to a complete chaos, because Iran has provided, or prepared rather, an Ayatollah for every Arab country. And there is an Ayatollah for every Arab country. I reiterate this. So if Iran is to succeed and prevail, there is no reason why they should stop from establishing or installing their Ayatollahs in the Arab capitals. And every Arab country feels this way, other than Syria and Libya. This is why I don't believe that Saudi Arabia will be engaged or could be engaged in such affairs. There could be some private citizens, people who have nothing to do with the official Saudi policy. This is something else.
Our guest, Nizar Hamdoon, he's the Iraqi ambassador of the United States, has been the Iraqi ambassador for the last 2 years. He is an architect by profession. How does someone go from being an architect to find themselves as the Iraqi ambassador here in Washington, D.C.?
I think that the best definition, Carl, of diplomacy is being the art of creation, the art of starting new initiatives, the art of communicating with people. So in that sense, I believe there are lots of commons between architecture and diplomacy.
Miami Beach, Florida. You're our next caller. Go ahead, please.
Your Excellency, I used to live in Iran and in your country and in Lebanon, also in Syria sometimes, and I visited Libya. And I know something about it. The worst part of it is that our people here in the United States know very, very little about your country and your ancestors and your history. I never recall any Iraqi being a terrorist, putting bombs, killing people in Europe or anywhere else in the world. I never recall an Iranian doing the same thing. The Syrians, they have always did that. The Libyans, they have always done that. And remember, the umbilical cord with the Lebanese factions now from Iran is their religion. But there never been an Iranian or an Iraqi being a terrorist and killing people.
Miami Beach, Florida. Thanks for the call. Is he historically correct?
Well, I don't think that talking history at this moment will be of any benefit, but I believe that every individual in this world, and especially when it comes to third world countries who are still in the process of settling their social and economic matters, any individual could be a terrorist or could be a very moderate man. It all depends on the situation, on the circumstances, how he'll be raised, how he'll be educated, trained, how could be inspired. So I think in the Iraqi case, in the last 15 years, the government there was a stabilizing factor, not just regionally in my view, but also domestically. And usual stability or stable mind government start from its domestic matters. If a country is not interested in building itself internally or providing a better standards of living, I don't feel that it really can be cooperative in its regional or its international relations. Here again, I mean, it's not the matter of the Iranian people or the Iraqi people or the Syrian people. It's the matter of the governments who are in charge. This is why we started to see some Syrian terrorists, to see some Iranian terrorists, or people who are connected to those governments by support or by training or by inspiration. In the Iraqi case, Iraq was very much interested in building itself domestically and at the same time in trying to defend. Maybe because of our landlocked situation, Iraq being surrounded by 6 or 7 nations, having a very small outlet to the Gulf, there was a historic fear from being subject to invasion, from being subject to interference from regional and international powers. And this is why the Iraqis always believe that wherever they get an opportunity to build their economy, to build their society, and to build an army that can defend, they never hesitated. And this is why the Iraqis feel, or at least since the 70s, where they started to get some good wealth because of the oil, the nationalization of the oil installations in Iraq, that by starting to build the country, they started to feel more cooperative. In the case of Turkey, we started a good, meaningful relations with Turkey, have an oil outlet through their territory, and have lots of joint projects with the Turkish government, with Kuwait, with the Saudis, with the Jordanians, with the Iranians. We in 1975 we went to the Algiers Accord with them, which have regulated our relations until Khomeini came and condemned that accord and violated its items. So I think it all depends on the government and on the doctrine that inspired the government. It's not the matter of the individuals. The Iraqis, the Iranians, the Egyptians, even the Lebanese before this civil war started were very civilized people who are ready to live very peacefully, ready to deal with the rest of the world. But if somebody now lives under the shelling of Lebanon, under the daily shelling between different factions, knowing nothing even about international politics other than the domestic politics, that he is with this militia and the other militia is shelling him and he's trying to stick to his life, of course, so he carries a rifle or an RPG or whatever and try to kill others before he gets killed. Of course, this will help to create more terrorism. But the nature of those people originally, I think, is no difference. There's no difference between them and any other individual in the world at large.
Arizona, you're our next caller. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Good evening, Ambassador. It's an honor to talk to you. I'm an Arab. I live in Arizona, and I think most of the Arab people support in Iraq, with the exception of Syrian government and Libyan government. I believe the Syrian people and the Libyan people is support in Iraq, and I think Iraq stood up against the aggression which has been taken by the Iranian against all Arab people. And I'd like to say I support the Iraqi government, I support President Saddam Hussein, and I'd like your comment on the war now, I mean in Lebanon, that the Shiite is taken up on the Palestinian. And I'd like to ask you about the Israeli. They always twist in the truth. Every time they try to divide the Arab world. They twist the truth and they said the Saudi do it, or the Saudi did it, or Kuwaiti did it, or they always try to lay the blame on other Arab people.
Arizona, thanks for the call. Nizar Hamdoon.
Well, on Lebanon, very briefly, the Iraqi position on it from the beginning was that we are against the intervention of the foreign powers in Lebanon, and namely here Syria and Israel. And we believe if the Lebanese people are left to themselves, and obviously the arm dealers should stop providing arms to Lebanese people, which will provide them with the means of killing each other, that we think the opportunities are much better if a government in Lebanon get more independence out of the influence of either Israel or Syria. We believe that the government in Lebanon could really establish more and create more stability. On the Israeli thing, I prefer that we wait and see more of this story and to see where exactly Israel did really interfere. And I believe in the best judgment of the American people. We all have common interest in this world, in stability and maintaining the current status quo. And I believe that the Israeli policy was very unfortunately against this stability. If Israel was interested in a peaceful Middle East, it should not provide Iran with arms, because providing arms means more conflict, especially because Iran in this case is insisting on the continuation of the war. If Iran was ready or was in the case of defending itself, then any provision will be well understood. So this really gives me a kind of idea about the way the Israelis feel about the Middle East, that as long as conflicts continue, they feel secure. I feel this is unacceptable, and it's not true, because this Middle East is one kind of creation, and whatever happens in any part of it will affect, whether sooner or later, the other parts. So I prefer to leave that to the best judgment of the American people. They know Israel even better than I do, and they know their government here better than I do, and therefore they can make their own judgment.
Easton, Maryland, good evening. Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you, Ambassador Hamdoon. There is a factor involved in this American overture to Iran that is not being discussed. That factor is the massing of the Soviet troops on the northern border of Iran. For the last 4 years, the Soviet troops have been building staging areas, landing zones, and nice concrete highways up to the border of Iran. At this time, the massing of troops is growing daily. The other day in India, when Gorbachev said the troops were leaving Afghanistan, he didn't mean they were going home. He meant they're going into Iran. Our government knows it, and we feel, and I feel that your government knows it, and I feel assured that the Americans on the ground in Iran, and there are more there now, are not looking at your country, sir. They are looking north to Russia. Russia has set this plan since the two-day party in Iran was wiped out. Of course, that's not the only reason. It's the oil fields that they have their heart set on, and your government has not made a single statement concerning this fact, and I'd like for you to comment on what your government, how your government feels about this obviously imminent Russian incursion into
Eastern Maryland,
Iran.
thanks for the call. Nizar Hamdoon.
Well, sir, we don't have satellites to oversee what's happening on that border. Our hands are full with our borders with Iran. I personally don't think that the Soviets really are about to intervene in Iran, for a very simple reason, that the Soviets are pretty much cautious in dealing with Iran, because Iran under this government has become a very unpredictable, very uncontrollable factor in the area. And I believe that superpowers by nature don't like to deal with uncontrollable factors, whether the United States or the Soviet Union. And therefore, I feel that there is some exaggeration. Here I don't deny or don't even approve that there is some kind of massing on the Iranian border from the Soviet Union part. But I feel that the Soviets are not that are not in a situation where they are preparing for something of that sort. And the Iranian government is immune not just to the dealing with the West, but also to the dealing with the East, because they have talked about a divine doctrine, and Khomeini has built his reign according to this. It's not easy for this government, with or without Khomeini, even after Khomeini leaves the scene, to be considered as a pro to any of the camps, because this will make the essence of this doctrine collapse. So I believe that we should really try to understand what this doctrine of Khomeini means and what are the components of it. I don't feel that he can be a pro-Soviet nor a pro-American. Soviets and Americans, communism and capitalism are very contemporary phenomena. Khomeini, his mind, his doctrine is a mid-ages kind of phenomena. It cannot match any contemporary way of thinking. It takes things back to 14 centuries ago. I'm not here saying that they are not clever, they are not shrewd. Yes, I mean, when it comes to blackmail, when it comes to try to play games with other nations, they are very clever. I should admit this. But this had nothing to do with a contemporary kind of doctrine that could live, whether with the Soviets or with the Americans.
Our guest, Nizar Hamdoon, is the Iraqi ambassador to the United States. He's been in that position for the last 2 years. Essentially, we're discussing the role of the U.S. in selling arms via Israel to Iran and the impact of that arms sale on the Iran-Iraq war. If you have a question or comment, please feel free to use the numbers at the bottom of your screen. San Diego, California, go ahead, please.
Hi, Carl. How are you doing?
Very good, and yourself?
Oh, it wouldn't do much good to complain, but as a student of human rights situations around the world, I've noticed that there are a couple of areas in which Iraq has been in the news, and I would just like to formulate a little question for the ambassador, and then I'll take my answer off the air. According to a couple of bulletins released by Amnesty International in December 1985 and January 1986, 300 Kurdish children were arrested in Suleimania. Some were tortured, some were killed. And in another incident, over 60 political prisoners and army deserters were alleged to have been executed. 4 of the victims were named. According to the Irish Times, in this period, at least 300 Kurdish civilians were killed in a 2.5-month-long sweep by Iraqi government forces. I'm curious, did these events happen or not? If so, what was going on? And I'd like to know the ambassador's version of the events taking place these days in Kurdistan, in the Iraq-Turkey border region, where I hear that many Kurdish villages have been destroyed recently. Are the Turkish and Iraqi regimes cooperating in militarily suppressing the Kurds? And that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Well, on the children, I've commented earlier on this show that this is not true. We don't do that. And we may arrest some people who are undertaking violent actions to kill innocents and to assassinate officials and do violent actions against the country and against the government. And I think that's obvious, and any country will do the same. But not with children, because children have nothing to do with violence. For this simple reason, we don't do that. With the army deserters, we are a country at war. We are a 15 million people country facing 45 million country, which is Iran, for the 7th year, facing the human wave tactics, where hundreds of thousands of people come to our border, and we give casualties, they give higher casualties. It's not an easy situation, I should admit. So obviously, in some circumstances in the front, when there are deserters, there is some kind of action taken. I'm not sure whether it's execution or arresting them or whatever. And I think any country has the right to establish measures to keep its security intact and to keep its sovereignty. On Kurdistan, I've just mentioned before that we are the only country where the Kurdish population have the right of autonomy, self-autonomy, and they have their own legislative body, and they have the right to speak and to practice their culture. Obviously, we are against violence, and there are some Kurdish groups that were supported by the Shah before he collapsed, or rather before we had 1975 agreement, and then they collapsed and they started again their activities after Khomeini started the war, and they are associated with Khomeini activities, and in some cases they were in joint action with the Iranian troops in the north, trying to take over some of our territory. Any country will not permit this thing to happen. And of course, when it comes to the Iraqi-Kurdish borders, where the two countries are targets for the Iranian groups or the Kurdish groups that are pro-Iranian, we have common interest in fighting those violent groups, but not the villages and not the dissidents there. So yes, we have been taking some joint action between us and the Turkish authorities in order to fight those violent, those terrorist groups.
Norman, Oklahoma, you're our next caller. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good evening. I've been one of your fans of the program for a long time, but I was really disappointed to see you inviting a representative from a regime that is responsible for so many crimes. First of all, I have one question and one comment. My comment was that the Iraqi regime was actually responsible for imposing the war on both Iranian and Iraqi people. And it is really saddening that this person is using this panel to spread a bunch of lies to American people. So I couldn't hold up, so I said, okay, I'll just better speak up. Well, one of the main sources of spreading terror and horror in the region is the Iraqi regime. I wanted Mr. Hamdoon to express some points, if he can, if he does have any answer, on the torture of prisoners of war by Iraq, and the use of chemical weapons, and many other violations of international law, which I don't speak of myself, but it is actually recorded by the Red Cross, and which unfortunately is not being reflected by the news media here. And the other thing Mr. Hamdoon was mentioning was the Algiers Accord. It should be mentioned to the American people that the Algiers Accord was violated by Iraq first, and they are talking about peace proposals right now that they are accepting it. But why wasn't they accepting peace proposals at the start of the war when they were in our territory, when they were in Iranian territory? And right now they are talking about peace proposals. The Algiers Accord was violated by Iraq when they were invading Iran, and nobody was talking about that.
Caller, you're from Iran?
Yes, sir.
All right, thanks for the call. Appreciate it. Any comment?
Thank you, sir. Well, I don't know, lots of questions here. On the torture of the prisoners of war, I should recall here the report of the Red Cross on that incident where there were some representatives of the Red Cross in one of the camps in Iran for the Iraqi prisoners of war, where I don't recall now, between 6 and 8 people were killed in the front of the Red Cross people. And after that, after releasing this information, the Red Cross committee was banned from visiting those camps until, I think, a couple of weeks ago. We in Iraq have been put all the Iranian prisoners of war under the complete inspection and supervision of the Red Cross, and the report that they provide to the Secretary General is very clear on this. Chemical weapons, this is the Khomeini argument to tell the Iranian people why the divine troops of Islam were not able to overcome that small country, which is 1/3 the Iranian state, and why they could not overcome the infidel government of Baghdad according to their standards for 7 years. And they, the soldiers of Islam, with the Imam who is the deputy of the Prophet, how come they don't overcome Iraq? So the only explanation that they were chemical weapons. I don't agree or disagree here with any committee or with any organization, but I say that the Iraqis are defending themselves, and they have been calling for that since the first week of the war. Back in 1981-82, you, sir, referred to the point that why the Iraqis didn't go back to the borders before the summer of 1982, or why didn't they accept negotiations. Yes, we were asking for negotiations, but our precondition was, and still on this moment, if we have any precondition, that Iran should accept the principle of non-interference in each other's affairs, because we are living in a world at the end of the century where the international norm is that no government has the right to interfere in the right and the options of other people. And therefore, no government has the right, according to those norms, to send terrorist groups and to create terrorist groups inside another country, and to ask the government, the people and the army of that government to topple their system or their government, and have no right to interfere. That time, the Iranian government, and still now, has refused to accept this principle, which was, again, the core of 1975 Accord. The accord consisted of 3 points. First, Iraq give half of Shatt al-Arab waterway to Iran. Iran benefited from the next week. Their ships were in and out. Secondly, Iraq should get back some territory on ground. This work needed years because of the joint committees after work. Khomeini came to power, he stopped that work, and we were denied of the right to get that land according to that accord. And we have sent many letters to Iranian government after Khomeini came to power, and there was no reply. They thought those Iraqis are pretty weak, and Khomeini was the biggest figure at that time. The third item was this principle of non-intervention, that the Shah stopped supporting the Barzani group in the north of Iraq, and we stopped any support to the groups inside Iran. But the Iranian government from the beginning created or supported all the creation of the Iranian clergyman establishment in Iraq, which is the Dawa party, which was responsible later in bombing the American and the French embassy in Kuwait, and in bombing our embassy in Beirut back in 1981, and in killing hundreds of our people in the cities. That was before the war started. So I believe that if an American will accept that somebody export the chaos to it, if another country start to export terrorism to kill American people in the supermarkets and the departments, if somebody start to export its doctrine to the United States, if somebody start to divide the American people according to sectarian or to religious lines, if the American people accept somebody to do so, then I may accept that Iraq started the war.
Chico, California, you're next on the air. Go ahead, please.
Hi.
You're on the air, Chico.
For the ambassador. Could you please explain why you said in response to an earlier question that Iraq has sought peace since the earlier 1980? Why would Iraq seek peace after they were responsible for the Iran invasion of Iran?
Yes, sir, I've just answered this question and say that we moved our troops inside Iran after being unable to get back our territory according to 1975 Accord, while Iran has benefited from half of Shatt al-Arab waterway, which is our only outlet to the Gulf. And because Iran started killing our people inside our cities for the year before the war started, and we could not stop that very easily because of the Iranian interference and having too many people from Iranian origin living in Iraq as Iraqi citizens. So hundreds of our people were killed. We were denied of our right according to that accord, which was condemned by Khomeini from the beginning as being an American plot, and that the Shah has surrendered to Iraq. And by the Iranian shelling of our border cities, which started a couple of weeks before we moved our troops in, and the shelling of Shatt al-Arab waterway and closing it to our traffic. Also, a couple of weeks before the war started, and by mobilizing the Iranian troops on the borders. And we have a problem in our geography. We are much smaller than Iran. We are 1/5 its territorial size and 1/3 its population. Our major cities are very much close to the border. Baghdad is no more than 100 kilometers from the border. Tehran is more than 600 kilometers. We cannot afford to give Iran any initiative on us. And Khomeini was very clear in his statement and the statement of his president and the rest of the people that they cannot live peacefully with the government of Baghdad for many reasons, in my view. Firstly, there was a different doctrine in Baghdad, a doctrine that believes in providing better standards for the people there and constructing the country and building roads and hospitals and the rest of the thing. While in Iran, the divine duty was behind Khomeini, and therefore to establish Islamic governments according to his standard. And he is on record. I am not saying anything on his behalf. Go back to what Khomeini has written before his coming to power, and after his coming to power, you see that he cannot be satisfied not just with the Iraqi government, but with every individual government in the Arab and the Islamic countries.
Arlington, Virginia, go ahead. You're our next caller.
Yes, good evening. I'm honored to have met His Excellency Ambassador Hamdoon. I am American Arab from Lebanon, from the south of Lebanon, actually. And I agree with him 100% that the regime of Khomeini has taken or wanted to take the whole area back to the 14th century. And having relatives in South Lebanon, I know what I'm talking about. And I just wonder if any humanitarian assistance to the people of Iraq will be initiated in this country, because I believe it's the duty of every Arab to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Iraqi people and not let them go down the drain. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you, sir. I think that any effort to let this country, the United States of America, stick to its declared policy, which President Reagan himself have said in his last speech and in the press conference, that he likes to end the Iraq-Iran war and therefore end the suffering of the Iranian and the Iraqi people without toppling any government, I believe, in there, which is more to the Iraqi standpoint than to the Iranian standpoint. We are ready to live even with Khomeini if he accepts peace. They are not ready to live with us, whether we accept peace or whatever our position was. So I think sticking to this policy, which means obviously that there should be no armed provisions to a party in that conflict which insists on the continuation of the war. So I think if the American public opinion is to support this declared American policy and therefore not to permit that somebody provide any ammunition or arms to Iran, this will be of a great help to those people who are under the pressure of the war in its 7th year.
Dearborn, Michigan, you're on the air. Go ahead, please. One more time. Dearborn, Michigan, go ahead, please.
Yeah, Mr. Hamdoon?
Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
First, I would like to say that really Iraqi military make every Arab proud about their resistance against the Iranian aggressions by knowing the size and the value of Iranian military, how it's built during the Shah regime, and you should know that every Arab heart and mind, sir, is with you and with your government and with your military, and we all wish success and for our military, which, as I mentioned, make every Arab proud. My question is, as you know, in 1975, there was agreement between the Shah and Iraqi regime, if I can say that, or And also, this was in the cost of Arbistani people, as you know. And because I'm from Arbistan, and we consider Iraq is our motherland, our country, but still there is a lot of students in America and all over the world. Really, Iranian regime took their passports and they don't have nothing to show their identity, and they believe they are in Arabs. And first of all, and second of all, they believe they are an Iraqi. And why still the Iraqi government never mentioned that those Arabs have a right, like as Palestinian, to have a right to carry Jordanian passports. And Arab from Arbistan never have that right. And Iraqi's regime never did mention that. This is one. Secondly...
Dearborn, hold it right there. I'm sorry, but we're running out of time. That's one question. Any response, Ambassador?
Well, I think it was a statement more than it was a question. I thank you, sir, for your feeling about Iraq and the Iraqi army and the Iraqi people who were defending themselves and the rest of the region in the last 7 years. But on that matter, I think it's pretty complicated. We feel that we are neighbors with all ethnic groups that live in Iran, and we feel that we like to live peacefully with Iran. And there are lots of space for both of us. And this is why Iraq really feels that it is defending itself, because we have no preconditions on the Iranian government. We don't like to have any of its territory. We don't have any ambitions, and we have stated that not now, in the first week of the war. And we'll continue to feel that we should live peacefully, and those groups and ethnic groups and others inside Iran should also live peacefully. But we hope that if the war stops, an Iranian government will start to look after the interest of its people, and therefore better conditions could be provided, and people would not be left without passports or IDs or whatever they need to live peacefully.
Next call, Laguna Beach, California. I have about 2 minutes remaining in the program. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Mr. Hamdoon.
Hi.
I have a question concerning the beginning of the war. You seem to suggest that Iran was the cause of the war, when in fact, everyone knows that Iraq attacked Iran. That's obvious. Regardless of your reasons for attacking Iran, the timing was certainly appropriate to help the West, in that Iran was having a revolution at the time. And even though you had objections to a certain stretch of land that you thought was yours, why would you attack your neighbor during their revolution and suggest that they were killing people in Iraq at the time that they were having their own revolution? How do they have time for all this? Their emphasis was on their own revolution at the time. The Russians moved in troops on the other side of them. You started a war on the other side. And how do you suggest that it was Iran's fault?
California, thanks for the call. I've got about 30 seconds.
Okay, so we started, when Khomeini came to power, we sent him a cable of congratulations. We have invited lots of Iranian officials to visit. We had 2 overtures at least to go back to good neighborly relations, but Khomeini was thinking that this is coming out of weakness. They never took into consideration all our appeals to settle the problems and to live peacefully. And again, I mean, they killed our people, they established terrorist groups, and our buildings were bombed, and we cannot really suffer and just sit and see our country disintegrates and turn into another Lebanon.
Ambassador, unfortunately, we're all out of time. I'd like to thank our viewers for watching, and our guest for the last hour has been Ambassador Nizar Hamdoon, the Iraqi ambassador to the United States. Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Carl.
Those of you who have been watching and calling, as always, we appreciate it, and we hope that tomorrow you'll enjoy your Thanksgiving, wherever it may be that you celebrate Thanksgiving. Thank you very much, and have a nice holiday.